hello, and welcome back to the Unapologetic Podcast, a podcast mostly about Southwest Baptist University. I am one of your hosts, Brandt Merritt. Also with us is our other co-host,
Jonathon, Woodyard.
And today, for the first time, we have a special guest joining us. Leon Wirth, our Vice President for Advancement here at SBU, is going to join us as we talk about SBU's history. Leon, quick introduction on who you are and your SBU connections, which you have lots of bona fides.
Great to be with you guys. Class of 93, so I came from St. Louis to Bolivar, Missouri. Didn't even know that SBU existed before meeting them at a college fair in St. Louis when I was in high school, and so glad I came here. Wound up falling in love with the place and the people at SBU. It radically changed my life, not the least of which was I found my wife here at SBU. And then we spent 30 years after SBU in Chicago and Colorado Springs, back to the Chicago area. And then last year, God called us back on the 30th anniversary of our graduation, back to Bolivar, back to SBU, and really thrilled to be here and to serve in this capacity as Vice President for Advancement.
Awesome. Yeah, we're super excited to be serving with you and having you on the team with us, and as your role in advancement and working with alumni and donors, your perspective on the history of SBU is certainly important and a lot of meaningful insight that you'll add as we go through our conversation today. Before we do that, we do like doing icebreakers, and it's a little different. This is not just the first time with a guest, this is the first time that we've done this remote, so like we're all in different spots, which is kind of different. So
I'm in a different state. You guys
are in a different. I should have teed you up on that one.
I'm in a different state. I'm in Kentucky right now visiting my parents, but you all decided to do this in the same building but different rooms.
Yes.
I don't know why, but
well, here's my thought. If you're watching the video of this, there's like this three-way split screen. If it was a two-way split screen, I don't think there'd be enough width to show us. Okay. So I had a technical reason of thinking that this might be the way to do it. It's not just for no reason, but
that's why you're the madness. That's why you're the brains behind this operation.
Something like that, yeah, right. But you are in the bluegrass state, so that's your sweet Kentucky home, right?
That's right. Down here visiting my mom and dad. My dad just had knee surgery, second one in like a month and a half or so. So just helping my mom with him for a few days.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we will try to bear with our physical distance and technical trials of using the remote option for this way as we go through it. So, icebreaker today, as I teed you guys up ahead of time, the best book that you have read this past year. So, any book, best one that you've read this past year, what would it be?
I'll let Leon go first.
Well, I'm going to revisit a classic that I revisited this last year that really made a huge impact on my life. It's a book called The Grace and Truth Paradox by Randy Alcorn. And the premise of the book is that John is inspired to describe Jesus as full of grace and truth in John 1, and looking at the challenge we have as believers, corporately and individually, because we have a tendency to be leaning strongly toward one or the other, either strong in grace or strong in truth, and really challenging what it means to be full of grace and full of truth at the same time, not 50-50, but 100-100, as the Lord has been our model and example for that. So it's a very convicting book, very inspiring book. I think it's the kind of book that for the times we live in is really important for us as believers to wrestle with, because we're faced with the need in our culture, in the world around us, is crying out for grace and truth at the same time, and I want to be better at showing both.
Great,
that's a good option. Jonathon, what you got?
Sure. The Anxious Generation, I think I've talked about it a lot.
Yep.
I'm doing a podcast or a guest on a podcast for a friend of mine who pastors a church in Indiana. We're doing 4, 5, 6 or so episodes talking through that book. I took my staff, I read the book last year, or when it came out earlier. Jonathon Haidt is the author. He had written a book last year called The Coddling of the American Mind. I'd read that last year, or a couple years ago. So I had my staff go through that one last year, and then this year we followed it up with The Anxious Generation. And given that we live and breathe on a college campus around what he would call the anxious generation, it just had so much insight into understanding the moment, understanding these students, understanding what they're going through, the rise in like 143 or so % increase in anxiety, depression, those kind of internalizing disorders. And so just helping us understand as a student life team who we're working with and how we can make an impact in their life. So the anxious generation, all the things that he talks about, this generation moving from a play-based generation to a phone-based generation, and the impacts it's having on their social abilities, the anxiety they're feeling when it comes to exams, the inability to navigate relational tension, all this stuff that we're constantly working with students on. This book is helping us understand a little bit of where that comes from, while at the same time convicting me, because I look at that anxious generation and the phone-basedness and think, man, I'm tied to this thing all the time too. So it's kind of convicting in your own life, but also helps me understand who we're working with. So probably the best book outside the Bible, of course, that I read this year.
Yeah, we did qualify ahead of time that we couldn't say the Bible because Jonathon would have.
I had to get it in there.
That's right.
So I'm going to take the liberty of having asked the question and going last. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say two. So the first one, and it's actually very much along the lines of the ones you guys talked about, Digital Liturgies by Samuel James. Not a long book, so it's certainly one I would recommend if you're not trying to bite off too much, but just very insightful into this current technology moment. A lot about phones and how we use phones, but also just how we integrate technology into our life and how we think about it as a Christian. I think he does a good job of not painting all technology, all digital things that we work with as bad. There are really good things, such as doing a podcast from different parts of the country, that we can benefit from some of the ways that things have been developed and progressed, but clearly there's a lot of negatives that come with it. So just a good, thoughtful look at how we can manage technology appropriately, not let it run our lives, not let it run our kids' lives, and think about it from a Christian point of view. The other one I'm about halfway through, and it's not a single narrative, it's a collection of, I guess, articles from D.A. Carson. It's called The Gospel in the Modern World, collection of D.A. Carson pieces. And just being honest, I had never really read Carson till I started going through this. Have read pretty much everyone that would be associated with Carson and just had not really read into it. So just really good, thoughtful commentary on like the purpose of the viewpoint of education from a Christian perspective, which was really interesting. Him from a theologian perspective, the difference between biblical theology, systematic theology, how they build upon each other, just things I'd not really been exposed to that level of a theological perspective, like theological training perspective, just in these short kind of articles. I thought was really well done. So again, halfway through that one, but really enjoying Carson's stuff.
For those that are listening, anybody, if you ever want to pick up somebody that knows the New Testament, Old Testament, can speak into biblical theology, systematic theology, church history, D.A. Carson is just a polymath. I mean, he's just one of the best out there. So if you ever are looking for a commentary on, say, Matthew, and you can get Carson's work on Matthew, you won't find one. I don't think you'll find one better. So I'd commend him to anybody listening to us as a very faithful guide. Older now, health isn't that great, but still sharp, and somebody that I would recommend people read.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. That's a good book review from our end. So thank you guys for humoring me on that icebreaker. So SBU's history. I guess I'll do a little bit of ground laying and context, and then again, Leon, you as the 93 alum, Jonathon, you as the resident church historian who loves reading. I mean, you're literally going through the minutes of the Missouri Baptist Convention right now just because you think it's fun. So I don't know. Well, I'm saying you think it's fun. You can tell me if you think it's fun. Or if
I do think it's fun, but we don't have to talk about that.
So just a real natural inclination to history. I think you guys will really dive into the details, but I'll do a little bit of stage setting. So we've mentioned it a couple times. SBU is 146 years old, founded in 1878. There's not a lot of universities or Christian universities that are as old or older than we are. Actually, that would have been a good exercise to go and get a count of that. But we are on the older end, the more established end, historic end of Christian universities. And there's, I think, a great sense of pride that comes with that. And then when you're around for that long, there's just a lot of things that will naturally happen. I mean, we, just post-Civil War as a founding to then going through world wars, depressions, civil rights, 80s, 90s. I mean, just there's a lot of things that the institution has seen, and we're, Jonathon and I sort of coming in newish and being exposed to the SBU culture and history. Leon, you with, at least 30 years now of part of the SBU community. I mean, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg of what the history has been. So that's why we think this is a good exercise to go through, to walk through some of the high points. We can't cover every detail. It's a lot of years. So it'd be a very long episode if we got way into the weeds, but I think there are some major milestones and major figures that have brought SBU to where it is today and have really contributed to the university and Baptist life, Christian higher education life as a whole, that are really worth discussing. So if we start there, we kind of go back to the founding in 1878. I think one of the things that we'll draw on a little bit that is very helpful for us and interesting if you're an SBU fan or just a fan of Baptist higher education, Baptist life, is there is actually a book that compiles a lot of SBU history over the years. To Noonday Bright? No, I'm going to get that wrong. To Noonday Bright.
That's it.
And there's actually been a play developed out of the book that we got the chance to go see at the Stained Glass Theater last year that a lot of Kevin Schreiber, our faculty, was part of it, and some other community members were part of it. So just kind of a neat storytelling that's been captured of the history of SBU, but it all starts at that founding in 1878 with Abner Ingman and James Maupin. So I guess, Leon, maybe start with you on just some of that founding piece. Give us a little bit of intro to Maupin and Ingman and how this all came to be.
Well, interestingly enough, they were students together at Hannibal LaGrange back in the day. And when they were there, God was already stirring their hearts to want to start a Southern Baptist school. They were looking at a couple of different places in the country, but they were pretty quickly drawn to Southwest Missouri and encouraged to consider that would be the place where that dream might be able to come true. And as they wound up canvassing Southwest Missouri on horseback for hundreds and hundreds of miles, looking for students and supporters to do that, wearing out their pants in the process and wearing out their bodies in the process, but coming together again and again to report back to each other. They said that the byword that they created for each other to encourage each other through all of this was, by the grace of God, we will succeed. And sure enough, God opened up the door for that first year in 1878 for it to be started in Lebanon at the Baptist church there in Lebanon. They were struggling in that area, but they were able to host that first year. So right away they knew we have to find a permanent home. And they invited several different local communities to come and make their pitch to be the home of Southwest Baptist College. And Bolivar, Missouri sent a delegation that worked very hard to convince them and the trustees that should be the home. And that's the home that was selected. So in 1879 then, it moves about 45 miles due west from Lebanon to Bolivar, Missouri, and that starts the story here locally.
yeah, I mean, just trying to picture what that would have been like. I mean, literally riding horseback, days and days going throughout the state, not just the southwest part of the state, but all across the state, with very little tangible evidence that what they're doing was going to produce anything. So
They literally had. I think if I read the story right, at one point they're talking about my pants are wearing out. Been in the saddle for so long, they don't know how much. They have $2.50 to their name. So just the humble beginnings, the work that those two men did to get this thing started is pretty remarkable.
It is.
Well, and then Maupin starting right off the bat as the first president, as well. Just that, not a trained higher education leader. I mean, literally just kind of stepping into a role faithfully, following the leading that he thought he would have. As opposed to now you have people stepping into like Dr. Melson, years and years of serving at other institutions and in leadership roles, and these guys just kind of stepping in cold, doing it as best they could. I mean, it's kind of just amazing that they made it through those first couple of years. And
they had their obviously their own grit, but behind them, the Lord, of course. They knew that. That's their byword. That's by the grace of God. But behind them also were a host of Christians. There was a host of Baptist believers specifically that wanted to see this work go on, who had a desire to see an educated ministry, who had a desire to see educated men and women. And so there were Christians behind them praying, encouraging them all along the way. And that was something that marked really Missouri Baptist up until that time.
Yep. I was reading, our library has a good summary of some different points throughout the school's history that Leon had shared. So one of the things I thought was pretty interesting from To Newton Day Bright is 1880, there were 154 students enrolled, 8 of whom were ministerial students. So that's kind of an interesting nugget from even in the early years. The university was more than just training ministers. There was a kind of a commitment to education, which I think is obviously that continues today in how we certainly still train ministers and pastors, but we're training lots of other vocations as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've morphed into, how many degrees do we offer now here at SBU?
Well, yeah, it's over 100, especially when we have some that are, Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science. But yeah, total over 100.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that founding, 1878, small, very humble beginnings, and the university just sort of progressively is growing over those next 20 or 30 years. Anything in that period, late 1800s, very early 1900s, that you guys find really interesting that you want to touch on?
Well, we graduated, I don't know if it was Leon, if it was the first graduating class or not, but I think we graduated 4 people, 1883. So you start a school and you hope it lasts long enough to get people through. And so, except for the time when, I think you'll talk about this in a moment, except for the time during the fire we were closed down, just seems since 1800, I mean, it's pretty remarkable to think about. Since that founding, 1883, we graduate 4 people, and we've been graduating people ever since. Now, a time there where there's the fire that maybe you'll talk about, where we're kind of having to close our doors for a bit. But from 1883 to 2024, almost 25, we've been graduating men and women and sending them out into the world. It's pretty remarkable.
It is, and there were a lot of moments of adversity in those early years too. And one of the things that you see when you read the book is, when Maupin and Ingman said, "By the grace of God, we will succeed," that was really a foreshadowing of exactly what we've seen off and on through the years, whether it is through fire, whether it's through ownership changes and challenges that come along the scene, different times where different crises were really challenging the continuation of this institution. And time again, the Baptists of Missouri, the Baptists of the Southwest Missouri area, the townspeople of Bolivar show up again and again, prompted by God, I believe, to show up and pitch in, whether it was financially or whether it was, picking up bricks from buildings that had been burned and figuring out how to reuse them and rebuild. Townspeople who were providing resources or places for people to stay. Just time and time again, you see the hand of God sustaining Southwest Baptist through all of those years.
Yep.
So maybe, Leon, one of those times you talk about a little bit is the fire. So that's something that, if you read the history of SBU, that's a big moment. And it certainly took the grace of God to get them through that.
Right. It was June in 1910 when a fire broke out in one of the buildings, and the main building was a total loss. And so Southwest Baptist College had to essentially shut down, and they spent almost a full year just trying to figure out what they were going to do. And in April of the next year, in 1911, they made the decision that they were going to rebuild. And the college property actually had been, for a time there, held by William Jewell, but it was returned back to Southwest Baptist then in April, around the same time that they decided to rebuild. And then the work began. And by 1913, what we see is Southwest Baptist College reopening as a junior college, and they were able to get students and faculty to come back, which was wonderful. The other thing that's really special about 1913 is that is when we started using purple as our primary color. And that year at the Polk County Fair, we sent some of our students from Southwest Baptist College to the fair to advocate for, to recruit students and families to go to Southwest Baptist College. And they wore purple and white, and they had these big buttons that said "Ask Me," and so out of that was born our school colors.
So there's our next recruiting strategy for our marketing team. As we have the Missouri Beef Days, we can wear the buttons, "Ask Me." But if anybody's listening to this and wondering where did the purple and white come from, 1913. Interesting, you mentioned the minutes of the Missouri Baptist Convention, which would be then the association. This is what, in the report of Southwest Baptist College at the time, this is what they said when it came time to give their report. Southwest Baptist College has passed through many trials and finally the ordeal of fire. She has slept in ashes since 2 years ago, the 1st of last June. Her resurrection morning has come. She bids fair to arise a glorified body. And then it talks about the money that they're raising, the rise of the college. So they reopened in 1913, but they hadn't been sitting on their hands since 1910. I mean, there's this collective effort in the city. There's discussion of what to do. There are people, the Board of Trustees, even when they had transferred ownership to William Jewell there for that period of time, I think it's like 05 or 08 or something like that, for 3 years or so, the Board of Trustees still continue to meet. They have no official control, but they're invested. And so even this fire comes and people are still invested. They want to see this thing work. And they reopened in 1913 because 1910, 1911, 1912, they're working to raise money. And in 1912, they're already singing, "Hey, the day has come." So again, just mopping. And there's a theme here for me as I listen to you and I read the history. Moppin and Ingman wearing their pants out to get this thing done. Thing burns down. People are still laboring, even when they don't have control of the institution, laboring to see this thing flourish. Fire comes, laboring to see this thing arise. And so that marks the early history, and I'm sure we talk a little bit more. I think that still marks us today.
Yeah, I mean, just think about that as an 8-year period. Like for us, just trying to put what would that look like? It'd be like a trial period starting in 2016 up until today. So you think about ownership transferring to William Jewell, because, and even the board's words at that time was that the school was William Jewell more able to strengthen, endow, and make permanent a school for Baptists of Southwest Missouri than our board, than we could do for many years to come. So just clearly almost at the end of their rope of being able to sustain the college like they would want. So that's 1905 to 1913, 8 years of just serious trial to maintain the institution.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long period of faithfulness for that board to stick with it and see it through to, the resurrection, as they put it in 1913. So we get to 1913, then you start lots of things happening around the world with world wars and depression and other things. 1921 is when the junior college accreditation becomes official. So I don't know if, Jonathon, you had mentioned that as an interesting point earlier. What did that sort of entail of that becoming a marker?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. So just at that point, we're this accreditation, right? We're not yet a 4-year accredited institution. We're not a university at that point. So when did all that stuff start? It didn't fall into place overnight. And so here, 1921, I don't know if it's something I want to belabor. I just thought it's interesting as you're tracking the growth of SBU. That 2-year accrediting, we're a junior college now, that puts us on this trajectory that later on, I can't remember the exact year, where we become this 4-year degree granting place. So just an important data point that it's the 20s that we become that junior college and grow from there.
Yep.
And there really are a lot of neat traditions that start in that very fertile area of our history between reopening from the fire and then 1964, when it was announced that we would be adding a 3rd and 4th year and becoming a 4-year accrediting institution or degree granting institution. We had the start of the Life Beautiful Awards in the 30s. In the 19 teens, we had the start of the Mozarkian Yearbook in 1916, which is the combination of Missouri and Ozarks, coming up with a clever title there. We have the start of the Life Beautiful Staff and Faculty Awards. There's a lot of traditions that are building up through those years, and then you get into the 30s. Dr. Quartz Redford arrives, and he winds up being the president with the second longest tenure to date, anyway, at Southwest Baptist. And we get through World War II, and then we get into the 60s. And what happens? We have a fire in March of 1962. Another disaster hits the campus with Pike Auditorium, the original Pike Auditorium, being destroyed by fire, and then rebuilding that. But in that same time frame, then, is where we see the acquisition of the Schaffner campus, which is our current main campus. We see accreditation for the North Central Association, and we start to see the vision for our current campus building out. But that's also when, as I mentioned earlier, we also make the announcement that we're going to add a 3rd year and a 4th year between about 64 to 66, and that's when we start graduating 4-year degrees.
Yeah, you touched on Quartz Redford, Dr. Redford. So him coming in 1930, one of the observations he made was the school was very deeply in debt.
I think you froze there for a moment, Brandt.
So Quartz Redford, 1930, comes in, and one of the comments he made at the beginning was the school was very deeply in debt when he arrived. And it's not until 1941 that there's an acknowledgement that the university has become debt-free. So I would imagine, again, that's an 11-year period of serious work to lay a foundation to get some of these debts that have accumulated over decades. In 41, saying that this is the first time in the university's history that it's been debt-free. So even going back to the founding, there are people who've invested in money that's been raised and borrowed to make the university happen. So we get to that point in 41, which in my mind is setting that foundation for then what you touched on in the 60s of, okay, we've acquired a new campus. We've started to build new buildings. A lot of that work done in the 30s and 40s allowed those things to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also see a key figure come up through leadership there too in Dr. Jim Sells. We sit in the Sells Administrative Center building here on campus and named in honor of Dr. Sells. And he really was the one that spearheaded the development of the vision of our current campus. and spearheaded that development, which really happened from about the 60s up through about the early 90s to the degree that we have right now. So as both president and then chancellor, God provides great leadership through Dr. Sells to see that vision come to fruition.
Yep. So 1965, 4-year accreditation becomes a thing, and we go through the 60s, the 70s, and we're Southwest Baptist College, and then we get to 1980, and we're Southwest Baptist University. So that, I mean, the 80s kind of become a, 80s, early 90s, a period where there's another transition from the kind of institution that we've been to, really starting to look like the institution we are today. So what are some of those things maybe in the 80s and 90s that you guys have seen as interesting to follow?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned the name change, and so that happens, I believe that's celebrated in 81 and eventually works into the degrees being Southwest Baptist University and so forth. I know of one alum who actually finished his degree from Southwest Baptist College, but didn't walk until the degree said Southwest Baptist University. So he likes to say, I did my coursework at one school and I graduated from another school. But there's a lot happening there, not just new buildings. The bell tower that is one of the most iconic landmarks on campus is built in the early 80s. You also have the development of other extracurricular activities. Lots of student groups are developed then. You have the football team comes back to Southwest Baptist in 1983, in the fall of 83. Southwest Baptist College actually had a modest football program back in the 30s for a few years, but then had to abandon it because they were having trouble finding schools to play against in this area. But then that comes back in 1983, and that's a part of a big expansion of our athletics programs, which is still to this day a really key part of our campus environment. We've got some great coaches that love the Lord and love using athletics to develop our student athletes spiritually and as leaders, as servant leaders. But a lot of that, was set in that time as well. And then you do see just a lot of new buildings being built on campus between that sort of 70s, 80s into the early 90s as well.
And that's when, in the 90s, Leon, we get our 10-year accreditation. I think it was 1996. So I think that's under CPAT Taylor. And then, I don't know if you want to say anything about him at all. I don't know much about his presidency, but he's a pretty important figure in the life of SBU.
Well, Dr. Taylor really wound up being the longest serving president to date. He spent 22 years at the helm of Southwest Baptist University. He was the one that established our motto, our mission statement that we still have today, was established then. And that mission statement is an important part of our identity. I think it was so well crafted because it not only reflected who we are, but to keep it aspirational for us, to remind us of who we want to be. And I know even today, Dr. Melson hits on that mission statement all the time. So yes, Dr. Taylor oversaw 22 years of growth. A lot of that was growth. We peaked in our enrollment in 2012, and he was right there for that. So yeah, we have a lot to be thankful for as we look back on Dr. Taylor's leadership for those 22 years. Just strong and stable leadership in so many different ways. And I have to say, I'm kind of a proud SBU dad. My oldest daughter, Hannah, graduated in 2018, so she was one of the last students to walk the stage and receive a diploma from Dr. Taylor, because that was his very last commencement as our president.
Certainly not one of the longest serving presidents that we've ever had, but maybe a very notable one was president while you were here, Leon, Roy Blunt, who was a U.S. Senator, recently retired from government. But that's an interesting little side note too, that a sitting U.S. Senator at one point was the president. He served 3 years as president, if I have that right.
He served for 3 years, and he came he came to the school. He had been in Missouri politics. He'd been governing at the state level, and then he came to campus to be our president. Spent 3 years just providing some great leadership and transitional leadership, I would say, sort of between the era before him and the Dr. Taylor era after him. And then the Lord opened up the door for him to pursue getting back into politics, back into Congress. He ran for a House seat initially and served in the U.S. Congress in the House of Representatives, and then eventually as senator from Missouri. And as you mentioned, he just recently retired. But he is also an alum of Southwest Baptist. He had graduated in the early 70s. So it was really special for him to be here, not just because of what he had already accomplished in his life up to that point, but because he was an alum who was coming back to serve and to lead us, and it was great to have him there.
Yeah, and then very recent history toward the end of Dr. Taylor's tenure. He leaves. We have Dr. Turner comes in, and now Dr. Melson. These last 5 years of going through COVID, the university was briefly on probation. We've just had some turnover in leadership. I think as we go back to that founding and we remember sort of the byword, from Moppet and Ingman of by the grace of God we will succeed. That's as true today as it was 146 years ago. There are still trials that the university has gone through in recent years. There are things that we've come to the other side of. God has brought us through and been faithful, and we see this other side of it, this success still ahead of us that is being laid, but it's by God's grace and then by faithful men and women following his leading to support the university, serve the university, and it just that's never changed. It's still the heartbeat, and it is really neat to look back at the founding and see how that's just been a through line the whole way.
Yeah, we're on the other side of COVID. We're on the other side of probation. We're on the other side of maybe even decline, right, Brandt? I mean, even this year, we can even say that now with the uptick in enrollment. I don't know if you want to mention that as being on the other side of maybe the decline that Leon mentioned earlier.
Right, first time total enrollment increase since 2012 for the entire university. Just growth in programs. We've added the campuses in Springfield in the 80s, Salem and Mountain View. In that time period too. So just the growth of the university that continues to grow. We've seen classes filling of nursing cohorts in Springfield. The addition of the DPT program, which was a major addition to the university that continues to provide resources and opportunities for students to serve, and then not serve here and then go out and serve locally and around the world as well, and just key industries that are needing Christians to serve well. We mentioned on this, and it's kind of worth wrapping up a little bit on this topic because next week is the Missouri Baptist Convention annual meeting in St. Charles, which the three of us will all be at, representing SBU. And it's kind of impossible to talk about the history of SBU without mentioning, just the close connection that we have to the Missouri Baptist Convention. It's been a partner with us through so many of this, and continues to be. Just a great source of encouragement and support for the university, and recognizing Missouri's kind of unique in this higher education realm, and Missouri Baptists are unique in this higher education realm, and that there are 3 universities in the state that are, entities, part of the Missouri Baptist Convention, us, Hannibal LaGrange, and Missouri Baptist. That's not common. So there's a real unique thing in Missouri that SBU is part of when it comes to higher education and Baptist higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that have marked Missouri Baptist. If you go back to the beginning of their history, right now, the furthest I can go back in the minutes online is 1881. The Missouri Baptist Association is older than that, goes back to 1835, but those documents are housed at William Jewell, and they're not online right now. And so there's a little bit of this interesting history there even, but if you go back and you read these minutes, you mentioned I was reading them, and one of the things that's pretty striking is even in their articles of incorporation as the Missouri Baptist General Association, they don't become the convention until 1958, but you read their commitment to education. So they want to expand the kingdom of God, and they want to give themselves to missions, and education is a big one. So you read the minutes, and their annual meetings from the 1800s till today, you always have a time set aside where they're hearing reports from their colleges. And Missouri Baptists had partnered together over the years. There's been a number of colleges, that some of that don't exist in Missouri Baptist life anymore, but William Jewell was one of them. It still exists, but it's not part of the Missouri Baptist Convention any longer. You had something called Stevens College, which is a female school. It's not part of the Missouri Baptist Convention any longer. But you had 5 or 6, at one point 6 or so schools that Missouri Baptists were intimately involved in. They're financially involved in. They're sending students. They're wanting to hear reports from how these schools are doing. So Missouri Baptists have a long history of educating men and women for the ministry, but also just educating men and women for the world, for life in the world,
right,
for the marketplace. And so the Southwest Baptist College, when it first was started, was an entity from day one of the Missouri Baptist Association, Missouri Baptist Convention, and they've been so supportive through the years, praying for the school, giving to the school, wanting to hear from the school and support it in any way they can, wanting to see buildings built and all these different things. So that's true. And so today or next week, when all three of us will be at the annual meeting in, I can't remember, it's outside of St. Louis. What's the?
St. Charles.
St. Charles. We're all in St. Charles. I mean, we're doing something that people have been doing since the 1800s, going to these meetings since 1878, going to these meetings and reporting on the work that we're doing, because those churches, those Missouri Baptist churches, care. They care what we're doing, and we are accountable to them, right? So we're not able to go out and just kind of run off the rails and do whatever we want. We have to answer to our constituents, which is the Missouri Baptist Convention, which I'm super thankful for. I'm thankful for those guardrails. I'm thankful for accountability. That's good for us personally in our own lives. It's good for us as an institution. And so long history with Missouri Baptists. Missouri Baptists have a long history of loving education, and SBU exists in large measure because some Missouri Baptists wanted a college in Southwest Missouri and engaged 2 young men, Maupin and Ingman, to go and do it. And so we're here because of them in large measure, and are accountable to them, thankful for them, and I'm eager to be with Missouri Baptists next week.
Yep. Well said. You'll be our resident Missouri Baptist expert here before too long, after you finish reading all the minutes from all the meetings.
Well, it's super interesting to read some of the things that they go through and the challenges they face. It just kind of marks God's people throughout history, challenges here and there, and whether it's SBU or it's just Missouri Baptist Convention in general, or the Southern Baptist Convention, challenges, but by the grace of God, right? By the grace of God, we will succeed.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, Leon, thanks for joining us as our first guest. You will forever now be, and can put it on your resume and anything else, original guest on the Unapologetic Podcast.
Yes. So thankful for you, Leon. Grateful that you came back home, as you like to say.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm thankful to be here. Thankful for you brothers very much. I love working with you guys, and so grateful for all you do, serving the Lord by serving here at SBU, and by doing this podcast. Thank you for having me. It's been great to be on with you guys, and just say a hearty amen to that byword. By the grace of God, we will succeed.
Amen.
May it be so.
May it be
Amen.
so.
So next week we will be back with episode 4. Jonathon and I are going to be welcoming another guest on. Jonathon's friend of the university, Dean and Sarah. If you want to give a quick intro on Dean as we get ready for him next week.
Dean pastors. He planted a church in Tallahassee, Florida. Pastors a church down there, and it's grown leaps and bounds. I think they have an Easter service every year. They have to rent out the Civic Center. It's massive. Tons of college students. So thankful for Dean. He's a down-to-earth guy, great preacher, great thinker. He's written a couple of different books, and also just somebody who is heavily involved in Southern Baptist life at the national level at SBC, but just has a heart for college students. He preached in our chapel not long ago, so he's been on campus. He's thankful for what he sees at SBU. And so I want to have him on, or we wanted to have him on to think through. We're a large part of our constituency is college students. So we've got something pretty important coming up on November 5th, and that's an election. So how do we think through the political moment, the cultural moment we're in, and what are some things that we could say, maybe give some help to our listeners, our college students, and how they should think about November 5th as they try to be faithful to Jesus. So looking forward to having Dean on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. It's certainly something we talk about a lot in our free time. There are just lots of noise out there, lots of ways to think about the election, lots of ways to think about this particular election, candidates for president, but even Senate, congressional, local things on the ballot. Many states, Missouri being one of them, with resolutions on the ballot related to abortion. So just a lot to wrestle with, and we want to be faithful in how we think through those decisions, and we think that there are better ways than others to process those decisions and think through them. So that's part of what we'll talk through next week with our friend Dean. And Leon, again, thanks for joining us, and join us again, the rest of you listening, for episode 4 next week of the Unapologetic Podcast. Thank you.